Hi Dominique, it's Miss Flatley here, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of a video to kind of help you answer the questions that I need you to do for your exit ticket on World War I. Everyone, as you remember, everyone in class had to pick out 2 different sheets of paper with special words that related to World War I and explain how they fit into the bigger picture of World War I. The 2 words that you picked out were the Allied powers, and you picked out the ticket that had new weapons on it. I'm going to do you a little favor here, and what I'm going to do is record this video to tell you about those 2 terms, give you some more background to them that you would find on the computer, but then I want you to write in your own words a little bit of a recap of what you hear me telling you about those 2 things. I want you to kind of become the expert in the class, if you will, on what those 2 terms mean. So I'm going to start off by explaining to you a little bit more about the Allied powers and how they fit into World War I. And then you can write, I'm going to say a good 3 to 5 sentences explaining what I said, almost as if you're going to try to teach other people. Because remember, this is going on a bulletin board in our hallway. So the first words you had were the Allied powers. And as you hopefully remember from all of our talking in class, the World War I was fought between 2 sides. There were the Allied powers and there were the Central powers. The Allied powers that you're writing about consisted mainly of about 4 nations, and that would have been France, England, Russia for a very short period of time. They were going through their own conflict that caused them to pull out of World War I. But then the United States came in shortly after the sinking of that big cruise ship that we talked about, the Lusitania. The Allied powers were fighting or competing against what were called the Central powers. And the main countries in the Central powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Allied as a word itself is something that kind of means together, okay? They're committed to each other. They're aligned with one another. They want to be friends. They're allies. So the allies in this case were those that were friendly with basically France, who was fighting against those other countries we were talking about. So when you're writing your paper a little bit about it, I want you to answer these questions. First off, what does the word allied mean? Especially when we're talking about the Allied powers. Okay. I want you to tell me, who were some of the countries that were part of the Allied powers in World War I? Okay. And then I want you to tell me a little bit about who the Allied powers were fighting against during World War I. So what was the name of the group that the Allied powers were fighting against? And what countries were involved in that other alliance on the other side? Okay, those are the questions that I want you to think about when you're creating your questions or your paragraph for me, your sentences. Sorry, that was the dog going after the cat. That was kind of rude. I'm glad you didn't see that. No animals were hurt in the making of this video. Xander Bartholomew, that is not okay. Very naughty doggy. All right, the second word that you picked out, or second ticket you picked out, was new weapons. And this has a lot to do with how World War I played out. I don't remember, I think you were in the class when we were talking about this. In fact, I'm pretty sure you were today. That we talked a lot about on several different occasions about how World War I was a real switch from how wars were fought prior to this. It was the first war that caused the people participating in it to pretty much fight defense the whole time. They dug trenches. They dug trenches into the earth to protect them from people who were going to try to hurt them. And part of the reason they had those trenches, they didn't stay up above the ground kind of running at each other, was because the weapons that were created, the technology of the new weapons were so violent that people couldn't survive. They would run out of people. They would be killing people so quickly, the world would run out of people to fight. Okay? Some of the most important or the biggest weapons that were new at the time of World War I, which caused this big switch, were the following. One of them was the machine gun. The machine gun of World War I was not quite as sophisticated as the guns we have today, but still, they could fire hundreds of rounds of bullets very, very quickly at people that were rushing towards them. So, in other words, it could kill a lot of people very quickly. So, not a really good idea to be running towards a machine gun. You probably weren't going to win. A second item that was developed during World War I and used heavily was called the artillery shell. And with the artillery shell, you might remember what was dangerous about that was because it was basically like a bomb, but when it exploded, it would just shoot out thousands of pellets of metal, of sharp metal, that would cause a lot of damage and kill a lot of people as well. Not only was it deadly if it hit you, if you survived it, it was very, very difficult to have it out. And lots of soldiers were maimed for the rest of their life based on these artillery shells that were fired. The other things that they used during World War I were landmines. And that is what caused, one of the things that caused no man's land that we talked about to be so dangerous. If you were a soldier and you were out in no man's land and you stepped on a landmine, unfortunately, the second you were to move your foot or shift your body weight, that bomb would go off. And it was deadly, obviously. There was also a lot of barbed wire that was used during World War I. Barbed wire itself was not necessarily new. It was still used for different purposes around the world, but this is the first time it was really kind of weaponized as a way to injure soldiers that were running out into no man's land at night and couldn't see that. Very brutal, very vicious. Just nothing. Well, there's no humanity in war. That's the reality, right? There's nothing ever going to be nice about people that are choosing to fight and hurt each other. We don't ever say that that's the case, but using barbed wire in that respect and for that purpose was really kind of archaic. The last thing, and probably the biggest thing that came into World War I that thankfully we don't use anymore, was the use of toxic or poisonous gases. We had watched during the 688, we watched the video where they put on the gas masks. And the gas mask process or practice that we saw in that movie when we watched it was to protect soldiers in a hurry in case their trench was hit by a grenade or some sort of a pipe bomb that would release this poisonous gas. Because once that poisonous gas hit the soldiers, unfortunately what would happen is it would literally almost disintegrate their lungs when it hit them. It was very, very brutal for a soldier to be impacted by those poisoned gases. So, for your portion of this assignment, once again, you're going to be writing about the Allied powers, and you can watch this video as many times as you want. You're going to write about the Allied powers and answer those questions that I had. The second part, when you're writing some information for me about new weaponry, I want you to identify some new weapons that you heard about, or what the new weapons were that were used during World War I. Tell me a little bit about what the weapon was and why it was so deadly. But I want you to make sure you're really working hard to use complete sentences. That means a capital letter at the beginning of your sentence. You need to have a subject, you need to have a verb, and you need to have a period at the end. I don't want you to worry so much about the spelling, Dominique. I can help you with correcting spelling, but I want you to do your very best to try to explain to me in your own words what you've learned about in this video. Think you can do that? Because I know you can.